When I came back from South Africa in 1950, I felt quite elated at some of the achievements and some of the write-ups and the successes that I had, but I was totally exhausted and I felt I needed a holiday, so I decided to go to my favorite place, Switzerland. I loved skiing and of course going down the Cresta Run. It's a big thrill, and if you want to experience it, why don't you come down with me and I'll show you what it feels like. Well, I hope you found that as exciting as I did. When I got back to London, I couldn't get something out of my mind which had been there for a long time. I wanted to create a very new and different kind of magic act, incorporating flashes. I was always fascinated with flashes of every kind: flash boxes, flash paper, flash string, flash wool, smoke effects, colored smoke effects. There were many, many combinations that you could incorporate to make a magic act look even better. And that's exactly what I did. Then I realized that I needed to have certain electronic and mechanical knowledge, and I was able to do some of it, but I needed something more refined. And it so happened that I got friendly with a young man called Bob Lacey. He was a senior technician at a famous photographic chain of shops called Wallace Heaton, and he agreed to help me. And by chance, his girlfriend was a wonderful seamstress and wardrobe mistress who could make the costumes. I intended everything to be in black and silver, so where I would normally wear a white shirt, it would be silver, white gloves would be silver, and even the cloak that I was going to wear would be lined with silver. And finally, I also had to find a girl assistant. Well, I had recently met a young actress with a very exotic sounding name, Adrienne van der Zande. And she was an actress and a model, quite experienced, and she agreed to become my assistant for this particular act. I had no reason to create this act other than self-satisfaction and fulfilling a dream. I invested quite a lot of the money that I'd made in South Africa into this act, and I will describe it to you. But first of all, I had to find somewhere to perform it. And in those days, the magic circle that I'd recently joined encouraged people to put on the act, whether they were experienced or not, just to get the atmosphere of an audience. We used to have a monthly concert at a place called King George's Hall in Russell Street, just off Tottenham Court Road. And I dared to go on that show in June 1950. The auditorium dimmed, there was some eerie music, we went to a complete blackout, and suddenly there was a big flash on the stage with some smoke rising up, and when the smoke cleared, there I was with my top hat, my cloak, silver gloves, silver shirt, smiling at the audience. I then took a little bow, removed my hat, which was one of those collapsible opera hats, and went 1, 2, 3, and as I threw it, it disappeared, and there was a flash about 3 feet away from me in midair. I then removed my silver glove, bunched it up, and threw it to my left, and about 2 feet away, another flash, and it disappeared. Again, I took the other glove off. Of course, everyone expected that to turn into a flash as well, but with a flick, it turned into a live dove. The dove sat on my finger, I stroked it and held it in the other hand whilst I threw up a handkerchief which came down a cane, a full-length evening cane with a silver knob. The dove jumped on the cane, I held it in my hand and then slowly released my fingers so that it was apparently stuck to my fingers rather like a magnet. Then I moved one hand away and the other hand, and the cane moved forward, and the dove started waving its wings very slowly. It's because it had to hold its balance that it was doing that, but it looked as if the dove was actually carrying the cane, which was floating just in front of me. It came back, my expression suddenly changed to a frown. I grabbed the dove and apparently penetrated with the cane. As it happens, the cane just went smaller and smaller and disappeared, and the dove lay lifeless on my hand, on the flat of my hand, and I think the audience got quite concerned. I then smiled again, flicked my finger, and the dove jumped back, and everything seemed to be fine, until I got hold of the dove with both hands, threw it on the floor in front of me, and there was another big flash, and a girl appeared. Well, that was Adrian, dressed in a sort of bikini with dove feathers, to represent that the dove had turned into a girl. And she stood up, and she was holding my cane that had recently vanished, handed it back to me, came up to me, unfastened my cloak. It was a big silver chain holding it. He folded the cloak over her arm, and she walked off to applause, being very careful not to squash the dove, which was now quite happily in a big pocket inside the cloak. But you're not going to tell anyone that, are you? So there I was, standing in front of the curtains with a cane. I produced a silk handkerchief and started polishing the cane, which suddenly reduced and reduced and reduced until it was a small magic wand. Well, it was about 12 or 13 inches long, shiny black with silver ends. And I turned around as if to go through the curtains, but I acted as if I couldn't find the opening. I kept moving the curtains and couldn't find the opening, so I got an idea. I looked at my wand and said, why not? I pointed it at the curtain, and a flash of fire shot out of the wand. It seemed to go out the middle of the curtain, and the curtains opened up. And there was my set, fully lit, everything in black and silver and glassware. It looked quite dramatic. I had two semicircular tables with flash designs in silver on the front. I had some discs hanging in mid-air. One said flash in the middle with a cloud of burst effect, and the other two, I'm ashamed to say, had my initials on, but that's the only time I ever did that. And then I started the act, doing various tricks, with Adrian coming on and off to assist and bring on props and take props off. Cigarette manipulations, silk handkerchiefs that penetrated the cane, also a zigzag design that suddenly jumped the other way, a reversing silk that the magicians would know, and many other tricks. And then one of my new inventions was a trick where I produced a silk handkerchief, again with a zigzag design, and stuffed it into a beautiful cut glass decanter. It had a narrow neck, so I had to use my magic wand to push it down, and once it was in the bottle, it expanded. You could see the silk handkerchief there. I then put a glass stopper on the top, looked at it, pointed my finger, and a flash went off inside the decanter, and the silk handkerchief was gone. It then reappeared somewhere else. But I'm going to tell you how complex it was to make that silk handkerchief disappear from the decanter. You see, everything I was doing was done electronically. We had the tables plugged into the carpet, and the carpet was wired up with some leads going off stage to a control box. And working the control box was another assistant of mine, a friend called John Solis. As it happens, John Solis later on became the secretary of the Magic Circle and virtually ran it for a number of years. He was the managing director of Marks & Spencer, a very important man with a chauffeur-driven limousine, and a secretary who did some of our work for the Magic Circle, and he was highly respected. So he didn't like to be reminded that he started off as my assistant pressing buttons, but he did a wonderful job, and I've always been grateful to him to get all the cues right. When he pressed the button on cue, when I pointed to the decanter, a flash bulb went off, an old-fashioned camera flash bulb, which I had hidden under the table with an angled mirror, so that the mirror would reflect the flash into the decanter. And as there was a hole cut in the back of the decanter, as I put the stopper on with one hand, my other hand hooked the bent pin to a slightly protruding corner of the silk handkerchief, and the bent pin was attached to a very strong elastic. And as I pointed my finger at the decanter, the flash went off and the elastic was released to pull out the handkerchief from the back of the decanter under the table. It all happened in a nanosecond. Even some knowledgeable magicians were completely fooled by it. I was quite proud of that particular effect. And I had various other things that went off by pressing the buttons. One of the other effects that was worked by the control box was when the button was pressed, it set off the flash to appear as if the hat that I'd taken off had disappeared in the flash. This was done by a black wire hanging in the dark with a little bit of fuse wire at the end, and when the fuse wire lit, it ignited a piece of flash paper. Now normally flash paper is white, but I managed to get some jet black which was bored around the wire. So when the action was throwing the hat, it looked like it had been thrown into the air and disappeared in a flash. Similarly to the glove that I took off and threw to my left, there was another wire setting off some black flash paper. The finale of this act was quite spectacular. Adrian had placed a large black and silver target at the far end of the stage. She stood in the center, handed me a balloon, and I inserted a silk handkerchief into the balloon. Once it was inside, I inflated the balloon, tied it off, and gave it to Adrian. She held it at arm's length, keeping her head well out of the way, and I then went downstage to the front, blindfolded myself, took out a large dagger, and apparently I was going to throw it, but instead I flicked it, and it stuck right next to my foot in the stage, quivering like that. There was an audible gasp from the audience. I then composed myself, picked up the dagger. Adrian called out some directions. She stood diagonally between the target and myself, and I suddenly threw the dagger, which burst the balloon, picked up the handkerchief and pinned it right to the center of the target. The music played, we went forward, took our bows, and the curtains closed, and that was the end of the flash act. The Magic Circle had devised these monthly concerts to give every magician a chance to try out his act in front of an audience. Anyone from an amateur magician like myself trying out an act for the first time to some of the professionals trying out a new act. And the custom was to get reviews from well-known magicians. I have some write-ups in my book which were both derogatory and praiseworthy. They said it was very original, the act. They said it was very ambitious and quite puzzling in parts, but under-rehearsed, of course. I'd only rehearsed it once or twice without a stage. And they also said there was a great potential there, a future, not that I intended to have it for professional use. And one of the reviewers was a well-known magician who was later on to win the gold medal at FISM. FISM is our sort of Olympics of magic. We have it every 3 years in a different country. And this man was called Geoffrey Buckingham. He wrote that I had to be more careful with my lighting so that invisible threads should not be seen, and that the assistant was clearing a table whilst I was still using it for another effect. Some very valuable advice. Well, I've told you a lot about the flash act. The one thing that I haven't told you, that it was only performed once. Yes, on that one occasion. All that expense and all that trouble and all the rehearsals and all the people involved just the one time. Of course I don't have those props anymore except for one. I couldn't get myself to throw it away. The control box that was off stage to operate most of the flashes. And here it is. Nearly 70 years later, you can see it's still in good condition. We have these buttons and bell pushers that were connected to most of my apparatus. They were worked on batteries wired in series. Let me show you. There they are. These are the old-fashioned 9-volt batteries, all wired together to give me about 63 volts. And the amazing thing is that they're still intact. When we moved here, just up the road was the Ever-Ready building, and I thought I would take it along and ask them how come that after all these years that the batteries hadn't corroded. And before I knew it, all their technicians were around looking carefully and couldn't understand it themselves, and they came to the conclusion it was that the quality of the batteries were far better in those days than they are now. Now these buttons are bomb aimers magneto switches. After the war we had lots of surplus stores around London, and I used to buy bits and pieces for all the apparatus that I made, and this is one of them. All these buttons are connected to these outlets, and then those wires went into a carpet which was rolled across the stage, and the two tables that I had were connected so that just by pressing one of these buttons one of my flashes would go off. These are two bell pushers that would be connected on this side for the hanging wires. And I'm really pleased that I kept it because this has meant a lot to me. Of course, years later that would have been impractical, so I had much more modern control boxes at the time. Everyone that's connected there could be switched on with these switches, but none of them would work until the master switch was down, and that would give me an indicator light there, and nothing would go off until I pressed a button. So for instance, I could have just 2 or 3 switches down, and they would operate whatever I had wired up when I pressed that button. Now of course that's worrying because many of those are very sensitive. They're either flash boxes or lighting effects, and I didn't want somebody setting it off by accident, so I carried around a normal jack plug like this on my belt, and nothing would work until I actually plugged it in there. And now if I switched on the master switch, then any one of these would be set, and when I wanted to work them I just pressed that button. Of course not all my shows were that complicated. Sometimes I just needed to set something off from the side of the stage, and I would use a very small control box. It would be wound up there, then when you were ready you could just press this button and it would go off individually. Although I never repeated that act, I never lost my interest in flash magic. It became very useful for some of the technical advice I gave on films and plays and so on. And in fact I wrote some lecture notes for the magicians and gave some talks about flash magic, including a book that I brought out in the early 70s. And I used to deliver a parcel of that to New York to a dealer called Tennant's, a well-known magic dealer. One day when I went to see them, the young man walked out with my book under his arm, and they told me that they thought he might go quite a long way. Of course I didn't know who it was, and they mentioned the name. Again, it meant nothing to me, but it does now. It was David Copperfield.